Hey everyone, just before we get started on this podcast here, I wanted a little explanation. I'm still with Ben Stookesberry about a mission he was on in Ecuador, but for quite a while in this podcast, we're going to be talking kind of around that trip. Mostly because he's under some contractual obligations because they were doing a like a video production of the whole thing. So apologies if sometimes it seems like we're kind of going around the houses a little bit, but we just kind of had to navigate that situation carefully so that we could still talk about kayaking in Ecuador, but also not get Ben in trouble with regards to this trip, which he was on recently. So yeah, into the podcast. Welcome back to Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayaking podcast. My name is Seth Ashworth, and just before we get started this week, I've got to do a quick ad for my Patreon page. Patreon's a crowdfunding platform where you can chip in a couple of dollars every month. You get to hear the podcast before it goes live to the public. We try and do some interaction on there from time to time. I admit I have been a bit slow this year, but I'm doing my best. We're getting better. If you want to support that, it's patreon.com/Seth Ashworth, patreon.com/Seth Ashworth. All right, this week's podcast, I say it like we're doing weekly podcasts. This episode, we are talking, I'm talking with Ben Stookesberry about one of the best places to go kayaking in the whole world. You can paddle from the cloud forest into the ocean. You can be alone in the wilderness for days at a time or paddle roadside runs. You can have maybe the easiest logistics of any paddling destination you want to go to. There's literally something for everyone, from flat water, scenic paddles to class 5 expedition NAR. You can have it all. And the place we're going to be talking about is, of course, Ecuador. Ben Stookesberry, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Seth.
Ben, I'm excited to speak with you because I know you have been on some savage missions in Ecuador recently, and I have been fortunate enough to spend a few different trips in Ecuador, and I have a better idea of the lay of the land there. So this, unlike some of our other discussions where I'm at something of a back foot about where you're going, I actually have a pretty good idea about what Ecuador looks like, and I'm pretty excited to hear about some of the things you've been doing there, and also just some of the changes you observed this year, kind of in that post-COVID times. What it's like, what you've noticed, things that are similar, things that are different from your previous experiences there.
Yeah, I can't believe it took me, over 2 decades of kayaking to get to Ecuador, honestly. I mean, I've been to Colombia many times, starting in 2003. And in fact, I traveled through Ecuador on my way from Colombia to Chile on my very first trip to South America on a bus, and like the bus stopped, and my buddy who I had been paddling with ended up getting off the bus there. We had gotten into a pretty serious mission in Colombia, so I think it was time for us to go our separate ways. He got off there. I heard from him later that he had an amazing trip, but again, I had always thought that, like, Colombia is so much bigger, and it's really not worth comparing the two countries because obviously they're just such different places. But I don't know, for whatever reason, I kind of thought that I hate to say this, but I kind of thought that Ecuador was like a bit of a beater's paradise. I can't believe I just said that, but that's what was in my head, and it's just the
Hey,
absolute...
man, we are about telling the truth as you think it is here, all right? So if you think in your head that you used to believe Ecuador was a beater's paradise and now you know differently, that's your truth, man. That's okay. Like, don't be afraid of that.
It would be more salacious if I still thought that, because I mean it's definitely the opposite.
I think you would have to be a flat out idiot to think Ecuador is nothing but a beater's paradise, because yes, it absolutely could be a beater's paradise. Like,
it is a
if
beater's
you
paradise.
Want to get into out of control,
it is a beater's paradise.
yeah, but
but
it's also absolutely
it's also
rife
extreme
for expedition kayaking.
Yeah, totally.
So why don't you take us through your first full Ecuador mission then, 2021. You're finally able. Who convinced you that the beater's paradise would be where you would be spending so much of your year?
again, I don't know how much I should let out of the bag here, but it was kind of the only place that was open for business at the beginning of 2021. It
Yeah.
was kind of the only option. Like
All right,
this is like telling it. This is
real
like
talk for a
telling this.
second here. Like completely separate from your kayaking. You're at the start of 2021. You're planning out trips. And you're like, the only place I can go is Ecuador. And in your mind, you see that pop up in the group chat there of all the people you're going kayaking with. The only option is Ecuador. Like honestly, what was it? What did that look like?
I mean, so we had this big mission planned for the spring of 2020, and then obviously, the whole world stopped, and we were going to go back to Greenland. There's no secret there, and try to pull another mission even further north. I mean, it was going to be maybe the most epic kayaking mission that I had tried to undertake. It was of that caliber. It had sponsors behind it. It was all ready to go. Like, we were just short of literally signing the contracts, and plane tickets were almost in the mail, sort of thing. And then everything shut down, and we were wondering if what the future had in store for us kayakers. Like, just just getting out of our hometowns to go kayaking in many places wasn't even an option. Luckily, here in Montana, we were still able to get out on the Clark Fork River for a while. But um, anyways, so as things luckily began to improve, and it seemed that maybe there'd be a potential for us actually to go ahead and do a high level kayaking trip, still Greenland sort of remained off the table. And maybe just this past summer, maybe something would have been possible there. But um, at any rate, that's why I started to pivot. And initially, I guess the first destination we started looking at was Alaska, trying to pull off something there, maybe something out towards the Aleutians. I mean, of course, there's legendary expeditions for paddlers laying in wait, whether, it's a first descent or something that was only paddled by Andy Embeck, as in what Jeremy Nash got into this year over on, what was that river? Anyways, I digress. And I broke my shoulder, and so we're talking, so that was it, 2020. And the spring of 2020, just as we're pivoting to try to focus on something in Alaska, seeing that Alaska is going to continue to have its doors open, I break my shoulder on this steep creek into the Lochsaw that's pretty close to here in Missoula. And so I put myself out, and so again, like, for me, Alaska's off the table, and really the logistics don't work out for the other members of the team to pull it off. And so we're going into the fall, beginning of winter 2020 into 2021, and just scratching our heads and really trying to get this program done, because the money's still on the table. It hasn't disappeared, but we know with everything that's been going on, it's just, we don't know how long that money is going to sit there in order to try to pull something off and make a production out of an expedition. And so, I mean, of course, um, I've I've met, the one and only Abe Herrera, Mr. Booth Sessions himself, at North Fork in the past. And the word on the street, it gets out pretty early that Ecuador is going to be open for business. They're just going to require a COVID test. I mean, it can't be understated, I think, how important whitewater tourism is to Ecuador. And it's become so evident to me as I've made my first journey there, that, like, probably relative, to the country, relative to these centers of Baeza and Tena, like, whitewater kayaking is probably could be more important there than anywhere else on Earth in terms of the
I would
local economy.
sorry to cut across you here, but I could not agree with you anymore. Like I think that Baeza region, like the Napa region especially, I think they would be completely flawed if whitewater tourism stopped, because there's so much money that gets put into the taxi service, the food, the accommodations, the like local area around Gina's, around Baeza there, and around Borja and Chaco and stuff. Like there's so much money coming in those like November, December, January, February, March. Like that must make up a huge portion of the rest of their year.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and not to mention just the cultural fact. But to get back to how I ended up there, I got in touch with Abe, who I had met through my partner Cheyenne, and I basically asked him point blank, "Is like, what, is there something truly spectacular to try to pull off in Ecuador?" I mean, I think by that point, by 2020, I wasn't so stupid to think that Ecuador was a beater's paradise. I had seen Todd Wells' film from the Zamora. I was aware of his missions there. I heard about their attempt to do this other river called the Mulattoes, and Abe was just like, yeah, man, like, holy shit. And so I was lucky enough that we were able to kind of sit down virtually at that point, look at the map, and just see like basically the most obvious river in, the the biggest river. I mean, it's no secret, the river that we went and tried to do. It's just so obvious between the highest peak in the tropics and on the equator on the planet, and the headwaters of the largest river on the planet. You have not just one river, but multiple rivers that are falling, up to 10,000 vertical feet of rivers that have never been paddled before. And so that's like the kind of unique combination that could easily stand up next to a trip that we planned to try to accomplish the most northern river on Earth. You can take one of these crazy rivers that has multiple rivers that have sections of 8 to 10,000 vertical feet of gradient that have never been paddled before and are locked into these crazy vertical walls with untrammeled jungle all around. Yeah, it's what he described to me and what I was seeing on satellite imagery was some kind of Shangri-La, and also a crazy puzzle, and a really, I don't know, I hate to say really dangerous, but like that's what I would find out when I went to go do a scout mission this past January. We were right on the edge of going after the mission and just being able to get all the logistics together. But thank God we didn't, because when I showed up last January, my shoulder wasn't quite all the way healed, and honestly, I needed that 6 week long trip just to like understand exactly what we were up against, which was probably the most challenging weather conditions that you can think of found anywhere on Earth to try to take on a first descent of that caliber.
So let me ask you a little like segue sidebar question here. So Abe, I imagine the conversation with Abe was like, "Hey Abe, we want to do an epic mission in Ecuador," and I imagine he has like some kind of restaurant menu of things that he's been looking at that he hasn't had the right crew or the right amount of funding for yet. How did you narrow down that what I imagine is like a Cheesecake Factory style menu, like 2 or 3 pages of options, down to the top three you wanted to go after?
Well, the one that I wanted to go after wasn't on his menu. but
Really?
it was, somewhere in the zone. It was near a river that he had made an attempt on with Galen and Todd, and they'd been rained out almost right off the bat. So he knew the zone, but the word on the thought was amongst all the top paddlers in the area, including him, that it was completely unrunnable and impossible. And as it turned out, after some scouting, it turned out that he was right, and so that didn't end up being the river that we tried. But
Did
it
that give
kind of
you like pause for thought to be like when a very well established like local expedition kayaker says, I think this is too much, and you say, let's look anyway, and then it turns out to be too much. Did that like make you sit up in your chair a little bit taller for the next thing you went to go look at?
Oh yeah, I mean, pretty early on into the process of searching for this candidate, of searching for this suitable, most spectacular river expedition that we could find in Ecuador, that we could also pull off. He put me in touch with Andres Charpentier, longtime guide with Small World Expeditions, and Andres was really the one who made the call, because Andres was the one who initially went up in the chopper to try to do the scout of the general area, and he came back from that scout and was just, yeah, he said that. He said, no, it just doesn't look possible, man. Like, and of course, like what I was initially telling myself was perfect. That's exactly what I want to hear. Like, if you're saying it looks good to go, then maybe we have a problem. But if you're saying it looks impossible, that sounds great. And then, when I saw some of the footage that they shot, it still took me several months to come around to the harsh reality that, yeah, it's this other river is probably one of the most challenging objectives, whitewater objectives on the planet. Has to be, and I don't really want to say it's impossible, but it seems like if there was a river that was impossible, that could be it.
Would it be fair to say that, like, with the current boating technology that exists right now, the current way people kayak down rivers, the current technology we have to access places via helicopter, it would be fair to say, like, right now, it's probably impossible.
Yeah,
That
and
leaves it kind
mostly,
of open ended, right? Like, you can come back to that. Like, you've still got a few years left in you. Like, maybe there'll be an improvement.
yeah, who knows? Who knows? I think that it's not so much the boating as it is the portaging. The places that you would have to portage where you couldn't portage, almost. I mean, it would be more of like a limitation due to nobody's doing that kind of climbing with their kayak. And
I mean, like rope climbing technology is going up all the time,
exactly.
like
So that it could
improved
be.
mechanical advantage like ascenders and stuff. Like it's out there.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that yeah, I was a little startled by that, the river itself, but also realizing that, oh my God, these kayakers there they know their shit. These aren't like some beaters boating around with, they probably do have old gear, because that's the only kind of gear that they can get in Ecuador, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's
But
no kayak shops there.
there's no kayak shops there. Anything that would actually come in officially, say a container of kayaks or some shipment of goods, is going to get taxed 100%, which is total bummer for their kayaking community, because already they're at a financial disadvantage to a lot of the developed world. And then you add on top of that, you double the price on top of that. That's why it's like it's become evident to me that it's important. It's like it's a feel good reason to want to travel to Ecuador, because this kayaking community exists there, and it's thriving, but in many ways because of the foreigners that travel there and that are able to, leave their gear, sell gear, hopefully at a real reasonable price to help out that community. So, but really impressed with Andres, and um, he was the one during that helicopter flight, during that scout mission. Supposedly the helicopter got off track, but I'm pretty sure that Andres diverted the flight to go up a river that he had been thinking about. That was a river that also wasn't on Abe's menu. That was a river that after he flew over it for the very first time, he did end up recommending to us, which again, my shitty, silly, ignorant brain thought, oh gosh, I don't want to do a river that some other paddler is recommending for me, like my ego is too big for that. And
Yeah,
it's
you
not
got to
going to
put
be
yourself in
hard.
check a lot more.
It's not going to be hard enough or whatever. And that river took me, us, a group of some of the strongest paddlers that I know of, 31 days with helicopter support to complete.
So, all right,
And
I've got to ask another. Only Ben Stookesberry would know this question. When you're looking at you're looking on Google Maps, you're looking at first descent. You've put your ego in check, and like from a local kayak, it's like, okay, we should try this one. I think it's going to be good. Like, how much suffering are you like budgeting for in your mind? Are you like, I'm gonna get to paddle one day out of 5? I'm gonna like what? How does your mindset work for how much walking and misery you're gonna have to take for some kayaking?
well, I mean, on the Greenland mission, we had probably 5 or 6 days of actually good whitewater kayaking for 41 days of going after it. I mean, that was the extreme, but also, the kite skiing is definitely a part. I mean, I can't look back on that and say that was necessarily suffering. But yeah, I mean, I'm personally like, I'm willing to not, spend the majority of the time kayaking. And I'm definitely more interested in like solving puzzles as opposed to getting unlimited strokes. So that
What
doesn't necessarily bother me so much. The
does
one
it
thing
bother
that
the
did,
other people in your crew? So this is my follow-up question was like, okay, you're
oh yeah,
you're
it
like when you're
can.
picking people to go kayaking with, like what's the start? Like, it's not like, hey, can you roll on one side like 3 times out of 5? It's like, hey, how many days are you prepared to walk? Like,
Yeah,
what's your top
exactly.
5 questions? Like, how many days we go without food? Like, stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, I would think. I mean, just like when you're, when things seem like at that critical life or death moment, are you able to tell a funny joke? And a lot of times it's me who needs to hear that joke so that I start to laugh. Like, it's the team aspect of it can't be overstated. Like, everybody's gonna have a shitty day. I'm not just out there like bulletproof. Like, I'll suffer too. Like, at the end of the first push through this river, I came down with a pretty bad case of foot rot, and I whacked myself in the hand with a machete, and like, fuck. It's just like I just feel on a personal level for this particular expedition in Ecuador and previous ones, like, I couldn't have done it without the team members, and so it's like, I guess the first question is, are you gonna be able to like carry me out of this river? Like, I mean, are you strong enough to save my ass? Because that's really what it boils down to, is you want to have the best possible chance, because these people that are right around you are your only lifeline. Forget about the helicopter. That helicopter is only good for getting a little bit of footage from the air and maybe dropping a bag of food out of the plane. It's never going to be able to pop down into the jungle with a 150-foot canopy on the side of a cliff and get you out of there, short of like some kind of Navy SEAL team coming out of a Black Hawk. And even then, like, it's the people that are on the ground in there with you. We're getting moral support from the outside, and we had so much help from the outside, but it just, these have to be your first responders. And then and then just like the bedside manner, the camaraderie. You just try to pick this combination of really good friends and really strong, like-minded individuals.
I know on this trip that we're kind of talking around the edge of right now because you're kind of still stuck under contract, but I know we've already discussed Abe Herrera, and I want to tell a funny Abe Herrera sidebar story to you real quick because he's a great guy for those brevity moments. So I was paddling in Ecuador with him. I've paddled with him a bunch of times, but this time we were doing this river called Cofanes, which is a really like cool, like doesn't get run very often river. You have to be really
beautiful
lucky with the weather. So it's exactly that beautiful photo that's on the wall in Gina's. It's incredible. It's like a really great epic run. But it's a full-on adventure too. Like it takes basically a day to get to the put-in. It's like up the end of this dirt road that goes on, it seems like for eternity, like right in the cloud forest. The first day is like all through these super tight, like really high gorges. Like once you start, you basically can't get out until the end, right? And you camp at the end of like this confluence with another river called the Dorado River. But once you're at the confluence, the white water kind of eases up, right? And the crux of the whole day one, which is the hardest day, is entering this, like, I think it's Canyon 2 or Canyon 3. And you get out to scout, and I've put on with Abe and these two Czech guys. And look, we're looking at like basically what's looking like Abe's describing as the crux rapid, right? And he knows he was on the first descent of this river or something, second descent. Like he's been there before. He knows like this move and the next two are like kind of the crux, and then the very last one at the end of the day. So it's like, okay, like this is like as big as it's gonna get, and we're like, he's a hop out, we'll go scout this. And we're looking at this entrance rapid, which goes like it kind of looked like a booth, and if you think it's like 6 feet, but you can't really tell from where we're standing. And this is higher than Abe's run it before, and he thinks it's like maybe the highest anyone since then. It's been run higher, but at that time he's like, I don't think anyone's run it this high before. And I'm looking at this rapid like there is no way I want to run this thing. It looks like kind of a good booth, maybe in like exactly one boat wide area, and then all the rest is like obviously a hole that's like backed up by these big rocks. And on the right, it kind of looks like a pocket that might be a cave. And I'm standing there on this rock, like looking for ways around this rapid, which there isn't. And we're all standing there, and then Abe, like completely straight face, points above the like downstream above the rapid. There's one of those orange birds, like the cock of the rock birds, like the birds of paradise. Are like orange breast, black wings, big like kind of mohawk. They're like indigenous to like this one area of Ecuador, like eastern Ecuador. And he's like, oh, look at that, whatever it's called, whatever the Ecuadorian name for it is. He's like, oh yes, it's a good omen. I will go now. And like completely straight face, just walks back to his boat and gets in. And I'm like, you serious? And he looks at me and like gives me a little wink, and then just like absolutely greases this line. And I was like, okay, great. Well, I feel a lot better about it now. But I felt that little like brevity moment was what I needed to be like, oh, okay, it's not that bad.
Oh man, yeah. The number of times he counseled us through a bad scenario or bad weather forecast, or a good weather forecast that turned into a bad weather forecast.
So let's talk about the weather. Let's talk about the weather there a little bit. For people who don't know Ecuador, it's a lot of the kayaking is in this like really, really, really absurdly dense rainforest. And because of the nature of the rivers, like it rains a lot, and sometimes those heavy rains almost every time those heavy rains lead to like kind of flash river rises and then flash river falls. So, if it's there's some rivers you're on where if it starts raining, you kind of want to either paddle a lot faster or like maybe go have a break for 10 minutes and just see what happens. What kind of were you guys are obviously locked into a big project. with only helicopter support and many days of walking. How were you seeing that weather hit you? How did that start to affect you over time? What was the craziest weather you were seeing there?
Yeah, so I'll go back to January when I had my first trip there when I did the scout trip there with Nuria. Um, we showed up, which was gonna be our start date for the mission, which was January. I guess it's said that there's a dry season that happens. Initially, my understanding was there's a dry season that happens somewhere between November and January, and then the rest of the year is kind of up for
I
grabs.
think it's just fair to say like drier.
Drier, right?
Yeah.
Drier. I mean, I've kind of heard more dry season, or is what was in my mind, and then yeah. So what's more correct is drier, because the day we show up in Baeza, bridge to bridge, all the rocks are covered, which means that when I say the rocks in that river are what, 10 feet tall, 15
Oh
feet
yeah,
tall.
like if all the rocks are covered, you're in for a big day.
Yeah, and it was like, yeah, it was amazing following Abe. Nori and I were following Abe, but like hair raising too. I was completely gripped. Abe started the run with like, "You guys ready for this?" I was like, "What do you mean? You're with Nuria and I'm all right, you know." And Jesus Christ, and I like almost wanted to hike out halfway through this the beginner class 4 river.
Yeah, it's
Not
roadside.
really.
Like the whole
It's
run's roadside.
the roadside class 5 river. I wanted to
Yeah.
hike out and made it through there. And then we wanted to kind of get our feet wet and try a little exploratory mission. So we were up off the side of Sumaco, hiked into another river, started going downstream, hit a box canyon, and we had already made one move too many. So now we're looking up at vertical walls. And as we're looking up at the vertical walls, it just starts to piss down rain. And I'm like, Nuria, and we made it 500 meters down our first attempt on a first descent in Ecuador. And I'm like, Nuria, we gotta get the fuck out of here. And luckily, Nuria is just a total, like, she's half mountaineer, and she scrambles up this horrific scree jungle pile on the side of this cliff, throws down our 60-meter rope. I Jumar out, and by that point we've lost all of our light. We bivvy up top in the jungle, set up our hammocks, and in the morning the river is 10 feet higher and charging over this 100-foot waterfall. Like, I mean, that's the kind of experience that I've had over and over again. I think I've done one overnighter. I did one overnighter in Ecuador. My first overnighter, my partner Cheyenne ended up coming at the beginning of February, at the end of my first scout trip, just to hang out, have a little romantic trip with my honey. And our first overnighter on the lower Quijos was awesome. No worries. We had a beautiful night. I thought it was great. And then this next overnighter we went down into the Coca below the catastrophe at Salto San Rafael. And that river rose 40 feet on us when we were camped out,
Woof.
unfortunately above this canyon, but I'd never even come close to seeing that in my whole entire kayaking career. The river came up 40 feet. I shit you not. I'm not embellishing at all. It was insane. Like the amount of, I mean, luckily the river did so um, in concert with a shit ton of rain that fell directly on us, because we realized that very early in the morning we moved our camp up because our bivy site, our hammocks in the trees would have gone under too. So, I mean, it's like you have to plan on it. You have to, there are other places, of course, in the tropics where um, it's, it's the strategy that you have to have, is that you always have to be prepared. You always want to be able to escape to higher ground, because they can come quick, and they can also come like flash floods that up here in North America only happen in the desert Southwest because of, lack of any sort of groundwater or any sort of ability for the terrain to soak the water up. You get flash floods in desert Southwest. But there you can get them because it rains so hard and it causes landslides, and a landslide can block a tributary. And then once that landslide fails or that natural dam fails, you get something coming all at once, like a big wall of water. So you have to be very cognizant of your surroundings, very cognizant of the weather. And in some ways you got to get a little bit lucky, but and there have been accidents, of course, right? And one of the worst kayaking accidents in the history of whitewater happened there was it 2016 when we lost
2017.
2017 when we
Yeah, in
lost three
January.
paddlers at the same time. And so you have to be really careful, really mindful, and if you're going to do overnighters there, then it's an additional risk that you take. And I think that there's plenty of ways to really mitigate that risk and reduce it to very slim, if not no chance of having that happen to you while you're on the river. But if you're playing the expedition game, playing the exploratory game, not knowing what you're getting into, having to spend multiple nights out on the river, it's scary, and it's something that over the course of these 31 days, 31 nights that I spent on this particular river in Ecuador, it was something that I felt like I was getting used to, but something that was just like the amount of stress that I felt when it would start to rain on the tarp above my hammock was just, it was pretty savage. I didn't fully
Straight up,
expect
I
that.
used to avoid overnighters. All the trips I've done there, I've done a few overnighters down there. But
Yeah,
if it was like
Cofanes.
the option to like, we could start 2 hours earlier and just do a 1 day, or we could just paddle a bit harder or a bit faster and just go just not have to do that. I was 100% always opt for I would not do that, because if
Yeah,
you got caught, you're in your hammock and you're all cozy, and then you hear that drip, 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 like I just couldn't sleep. Like that'd be it. It'd be like you're awake for the rest of the
it's
night because you're
stressful.
like, is this going to be nothing? Like, are we going to get a little bit of like small localized rain, and maybe the river will change color slightly and that'll be that? Or like, am I going to have to wake up at 3 a.m. and like put on all my wet kayaking gear and like somehow move higher up ground? Like like you say, it's stressful.
Yeah, it's really stressful. My buddy Todd Wells and a group, they put on just the standard Hoyin overnighter just before the Hoyin waterfall was reduced to like a 15-foot pour over. And so luckily they got to camp. Luckily, my other buddy Dave was standing right beside the river and basically saw the river just surging up, and they were able to pull the boats up, and it was all good. So I think with planning, and the other side of it is that if you go after a big mission and you're not prepared to spend the night, then that can put you in a more compromised position, in my opinion. If you don't have the resources to say you're in a spot where you've got a canyon below you and the rain is just coming down and you have no overnight gear and you feel like you have to just send it, maybe if you would have had overnight gear, it would have been better just to bivvy up, get up into the jungle, find a flat space and call it off.
Yeah.
And that was something that we certainly did multiple times on this river. So I think that
EJ's got a really good Ecuador story, not too dissimilar to that. That I'll have to get him on here to talk about at some time. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like if you're, especially for you guys, you're playing the expedition game. Like you got to be on that footing all the time, right? Like, oh, another night in the jungle.
Yeah, another night in the jungle, and just like, I guess another attribute of a good team member for an expedition like this is just patience. I mean, that's probably the utmost attribute, and the thing that Andre Charpentier, as we were leaving to go into the river the first time, he was just like, he had this song and dance going on. He's just paciencia, 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 and that became what I tried to use as my personal mantra. It was just patience, patience. Just, the more patient you are, the less you're going to get in a hurry, and the less that, hopefully the less it'll make a mistake. And even then, I feel like I made a few mistakes along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely for the overnight game, for the expeditions game, that seems to be what you need to be on the patience train. So the other thing I want to talk to you about is what your experience was with hydro projects and mining and resource extraction in Ecuador. I've been there 3 separate trips: 2015, 16, 16, 17, and 18, 19. And one of the big things I noticed was how fast they seem to be moving on building dams, and how shady the whole dam building process is, and how aggressive and shady resource and mineral extraction is, especially in some of the smaller towns.
Yeah.
Especially actually that Cafanes trip I was on with Abe, and I was lucky to go up to that river 2 times. But the reason you can get there, and there's a road there, is because a mining company was doing their very best to try and get a mining concession like right in that town, basically. And luckily, through I think working with Abe and Ecuador Rivers Institute, they were able to kind of kibosh that particular mining concession. But there's so many others that seem to be illegal, or I don't know, people are getting bribed, like, things are changing hands under the table. What was your experience running into that there? I know you haven't done like a lot of trips there, so you're not seeing necessarily like a lot of changes over time, but even from your scouting trip to when you actually ended up putting on, did you notice anything of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the biggest thing that I noticed was the change that happened right in front of our eyes with the San Rafael Waterfall. It was something that I was seeing online that was just blowing my mind. I think it was the icon of Ecuador, something that one of the few things that I knew about Ecuador prior to going there, and then being aware of its collapse, and then going there to see this, what was the world's largest arch that had formed in its place, where the river had evacuated underneath the arch, and then boating under that arch, boating through this canyon that you could that was brand new, and that had caused so much damage to the river downstream through the oil pipeline, and then hearing about the arch collapse and this catastrophe, and seeing and hearing that, all of these coincidental landscape changing catastrophes had happened just right as these steps had been taken to dam this major tributary to the Amazon, dam and divert this major tributary to the Amazon around the waterfall. One of the longest diversion structures ever built, financed with plentiful Chinese money, and engineered with pretty shady Chinese engineering and construction.
And also built like with almost 100% Chinese manpower, and that's one of the most shocking differences I saw from my first trip in 2015 to when I was last there in 2019. Was like in that time that the biggest dam had been completed, and then suddenly that town of El Chaco, like where you'd get on for Okachi, suddenly it had been like there had been a lot of stuff going on there, and because there was a lot of money coming in from Chinese workers. And then all those Chinese workers were all gone, and there was a lot of stores shuttered. There was a lot less activity in the town. It was like a stark contrast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't want to be xenophobic about this. Like, the United States has been responsible for plenty of economic just
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm from England. Like, we did a lot of really bad stuff.
yeah,
Like,
and it's really
like
not
a lot of
about
really
that.
bad stuff at the expense of an empire. But to see it in front of your eyes, in such a short time span.
Yeah, in this particular case, it is Chinese, and it's Chinese infrastructure companies that were building massive infrastructure projects in China for a long time, and now that those are, I guess, slowing down. Certainly after the completion of like the Three Gorges project on the Yangtze, they're turning their focus outward. And but it's just amazing at how shady the construction has been of this project that was billions of dollars. And there's the concrete that they poured for the powerhouse has all these cracks in it, so it's never functioned at full capacity. And Ecuador continues to pay off this $1.8 billion loan with the vast majority or a large portion of its petroleum reserves. The whole thing is just so sad, especially in losing the country's iconic waterfall, but even more so in the damage that's taken place downstream in the local communities, the indigenous communities on the Rio Coca. That not only were they polluted with all this sediment that's blown out from behind the waterfall, but then also hundreds of thousands of gallons of petroleum that leaked out of the oil pipeline because they refused to turn the oil pipeline off. They being, I guess, the Ecuadorian National Petroleum Company refused to turn the oil pipeline off. So it's just been a catastrophe. A lot of corruption, it seems, with the government that is benefiting from signing off on all of these big infrastructure projects, and it's all linked back to what is now one of the biggest threats to the country, which is gold mines. And for sure, around the outflow of this particular river that we were running, that we were quote unquote exploring, there are huge open pit gold mines where they just go and are taking the biggest backhoes in the world and just chewing up the jungle, spitting it out, and pouring cyanide or mercury over the top and getting the gold flour out. So it's a huge industrial process. It's basically an industry that's eating the jungle in order to produce this relatively small quantity of gold, that if they're able to chew up enough jungle, which in many places, especially in the south of the country, they're chewing up huge tracts of jungle and land and mountain to produce significant quantities of gold. But this is destruction that's impossible to reverse when you're talking about this ancestral jungle with trees that are hundreds of years old. Yeah, it's frightening. It's
The
frightening to think
economics of it
about.
are disgusting too, because it's another one of those situations where there's actually not even really a benefit for like the Ecuadorian economy. Like the local people aren't getting those jobs. Like it's foreign investments, it's foreign loans, so that the government can pay for foreign companies to come and mine those resources. And then when it's all mined out, like they take all the equipment and all the workers and they leave and go exploit somewhere else, and all the people in the area are left with are like just a big sandpit and like you say, destruction. And they didn't really, it wasn't even like, well, at least there's some benefit to the economy in that area. It's like, no, that there was nothing really.
Yeah, No, it's incredibly sad. You know, certainly a few jobs that are created, but like you said, the equipment is being imported. Much of the workforce is being imported, and you know, they're able to pull this off by simply paying off corrupt officials and making those payoffs go all the way down the line to the police forces. And then you know, there are certainly local infrastructure companies that benefit from this, you know, that because these mines have to be powered by something, and many of these mines are powered by these hydroelectric facilities that are coming online. Because you know, certainly especially after Coca-Cola, Ecuador became an energy exporter, and so the continued damming of rivers is simply seems to be powering the big resource extraction. So it's pretty crazy. And then even for, you know, what's really good and what's really going on that could be helpful is the ecotourism, of course, but even, you know, the local people that are involved in this really productive sector of the economy are afraid to speak up because of their fear of retribution. The very real fear. You know, there's already been members of the community that have been assassinated for speaking out too loudly. So it's a crazy situation, and it's, you know, it's not unique to Ecuador, of course. You know, this is the same thing that's playing out next door in Colombia and Brazil and basically throughout the Amazon. You know, because the Amazon is what, it's just so resource rich. When, you know, whether it's cattle or timber or gold or petroleum, like it's frightening to think about. But you know, there are these bright spots, I should say.
I think
The kayaking.
Ecuador is very lucky that it has people like Matt Terry, who runs Ecuador Rivers Institute there,
Sure. Yeah,
who
absolutely.
are like advocating. They're able to advocate in a way where they don't have to worry about retribution as much,
Yeah.
and that is empowering for a lot of people in that local ecotourism community to say, okay, like there's someone we can support who advocates for us, right? And that's what a lot of those other areas in South America are missing, is that one conduit person between like the government, the local government, the federal government, and the local people, without being worried about that kind of middle ground reprisal step.
Well, and in terms of what he's already done to save the Piatua River, I mean, it's incredible, the work that he's done and the way that he's able to really chase it through the court systems and do everything by the book, and just, I mean, essentially dedicate his whole life to making sure that, you know, they can't come after him, and they can't come after the local people, and taking so much of the responsibility on his own shoulders, to the point where they were able to actually find that Piatua project was under the table, that there were multiple payoffs to local officials, that in fact the judge that was arbitrating the case had been paid off. I mean, the stories are numerous, but that Rio Piatua is, you know, one of the more classic rivers, classic, well known, commonly paddled rivers in the country, and it's only still free flowing thanks to him, and you know, his um, and the local paddling community that's fighting pretty much every day to make that happen. You know,
Yeah,
whether it's
that
just
river is a
on
true
days.
Ecuador. Like if you say Ecuador, you think Piatua, like warm water, like
Smooth
smooth
granite.
bedrock, boulder garden, like just
Yeah,
endless fun rapids, nothing scary, no portages, just good time. Like put in at a bridge, take out at a bridge, just like the bee's knees of what you would want from kayaking in Ecuador. And yeah, I remember like when I was last there, like to go to the put, and you'd drive by like all these parks diggers, and you'd be like, oh, okay, I've seen this exact story play out already on the Topo in Banos. Like it's sad, but I know the outcome. And when I remember reading the like later that year or the subsequent year that they had found all these people were corrupt and it was not going ahead, I was elated.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so I've just only become familiar with all these incredible stories and this amazing fight that's going on. I mean, it's a sad on one side, but it's amazing on the other because you have these foreign paddlers. Matt, of course, it's dedicated his whole life to this fight, and because of his love of the rivers that he found in Ecuador and joining with Andres and Gabriel Garvin, paddlers from all over the world, really, and especially the paddlers that live there. Like it's pretty cool to see. So I think that there's a lot of positivity there. There's a lot that that also people should know, that when I first got to Ecuador, my first impressions of Ecuador as compared to Colombia, which is obviously a much bigger country, but I just found Ecuador to be this Shangri-La, like looking up into the mountains above Tena, being around Baeza. Like my travel, admittedly, in Ecuador has been fairly limited. Like I haven't seen the south of the country. I haven't been out to the Pacific coast. But my vision of that little area, this sort of epicenter of whitewater kayaking in Ecuador between Baeza and Tena, was just like so much jungle, so many beautiful rivers. Like there's so much there to fight for. And as compared to Colombia, like so much more intact jungle than I was used to seeing, around some of the big cities in Colombia. So I think, I would just encourage people to travel there and to do whatever they could to support the effort to protect the rivers, which could be as simple as, leaving some gear with the Ecuador Kayak Club, or making a small donation to the Ecuadorian Rivers Institute, or showing up at a protest in downtown Tena, just getting involved and letting them know that you're interested in helping out, spreading the word to friends.
Yeah, I think that this is kind of a great segue to kind of line us up for rounding this out. But I've been to Ecuador 3 times. I imagine I'll go again at some point in the future. Like there's really so much kayaking to do for everyone there of all different types of kayaking, whether you want to do something, hard and steep, or something, chill, or something big water, or something with lots of rocks. It's got it all. There's something for everyone. It's very easy. It's logistically one of the most easy places to be a kayaker ever. You get all the taxis, pickup trucks, and you get a pickup truck. All your boats go in the back. You go to whatever river, like all the local taxi drivers know all the put-ins and all the takeouts. You organize your time. Okay, see you then. Bye-bye. It's the best. It's easily one of the easiest places to go kayaking. You can switch between areas very easily by the bus system, which is very good. Yeah, overall, I can't encourage people to go enough. And like you said, if you can do those extra little steps, if you can, do a little donation to ERI, like leave some gear with Ecuador Kayak Club, show up at a little protest, it goes such a long way to helping out that local community, and they appreciate it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many little kids along the banks of the river, especially along the banks of that Hatanyaku River in Tena. Like, just stop there, say hello, let them get in your kayak, paddle around. These kids are they're dying to get into the kayaks. So I think the dream would be is turn each one of these little riversides community into a kayaking community, because they're the ones who are going to be able to fight best for their river. They're the only ones that can protect their river.
Yeah, and the cool thing is there's already Ecuadorians who see that vision too, and are starting to move towards it. So, the snowball's already rolling down the hill, but if we can help push it along, that certainly wouldn't hurt.
Yep. And I think it's, it's not necessarily to give away your gear per se, because there is value in creating value in your gear. And in some cases, giving away your gear only creates, um, could create potentially some jealousy. So it's really a matter of, I think, first and foremost, making an effort uh, to get to know the local paddling community. First of all, don't just give away gear on your way out, but if you're not getting a guide in Ecuador, like make a point to include one of the locals in your kayaking group. You know, pay for their gas, get them, put them in the taxi with you. And I think that's just a great way to start to make that connection and to start to understand what's really going on there. Um, because I think that's one of the coolest things, or one of the things that I've come to really appreciate and really love about Ecuador so much is just the people. For many of us, Abe is sort of the gatekeeper, or the gateway drug, so to speak. And you're like, fuck, is everyone in Ecuador this nice? And you're like, yeah, a lot of
A lot of
so
them,
many.
yeah, not every
I
single
mean,
one, but man, like a lot.
oh,
It's like Canada and South America. It's like a lot of nice people down there. And a lot of friendly
yeah,
people.
a lot of friendly people, and a lot of people that are worth getting to know, and a lot of people that have stories that will can make your trip that much richer.
Yeah, no doubt, man. All right, Ben. I'm excited to see the production of your trip that we've talked around this entire podcast. Do you know when
Yes.
that's coming out?
Yeah, we'll you can stay tuned to my
And
social.
where can people find you if they've been living under a rock this whole time?
If they've been living under a rock, they can find me at Ben Stookesberry on IG. I do still have some Facebook accounts. They're similar, Ben Stookesberry, with two O's. And yeah, I'll let everybody know when that stuff's going to come out, because super excited to share that expedition with with all my friends and peers in the kayaking community.
Yeah, I'm hyped to see it. I know a lot of people are going to be hyped to see it, so that's exciting. For this episode, this has been Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayaking Podcast. We will see you again soon. Peace.